Hi, Mel.
Hello, Wendy. Are you
Yeah,
ready?
I'm ready. Are you ready?
I'm always ready.
Is our audience ready?
But if they've got this far, I mean, like you could watch them out of order, to be fair. But if they've got this far, I'm like, congratulations, you've got an attention span. Yeah, and you're keeping up, which with me can be a challenge.
Yeah.
So we've decided on hidden losses today, haven't we? Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. I think hidden losses is kind of it's a good title, but sometimes they're hidden as in we're not aware of them because families have hidden them and tucked away. So some of the losses are in kind of intergenerational loss that we may not have experienced, but we feel the pain of. I think there's also losses that we may know about but have packed away, so don't really feel.
Mm.
So even the hidden losses, there's different types, isn't there? Yeah.
Yeah, there are so many, and as you say, people don't always recognize them. They can. I think people easily identify with loss when somebody has a loved one or somebody close
The
has
yeah,
died.
grief of loss as in
Yeah.
death or a departure of maybe through divorce breakdown, relationship breakdown, or friendships ending. That kind of grief is more obvious, isn't it?
Yeah, but I don't think even people always identify with those. They don't recognize them so
Well, I
readily.
think it depends how much you're attached, to be fair, doesn't it? Because actually,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I might have let some friends go and because like, yeah, I'm fed up of calling you, and doesn't seem a lot here, and so some of them fizzle out, and there isn't any grief because there wasn't enough attachment in the first place, perhaps.
True. That's very true. And there are those friendships that you lose and you don't know why. And you're
Yeah,
left with that, well, what happened there? And you
yeah.
have that no real ending, no closure to the whole situation.
Yeah, relationships are a bit like pot plants, aren't they? If you don't water them, they tend to kind of shrivel up and die without you maybe noticing, and they're like, oh, it's all brown and dead.
Yeah. I don't think that's the same with relationships. If you don't nurture those, then the romantic ones, that is what happens, isn't it? They just get fizzle out and wilt and die. And
Yeah, I hear you. But I also think you can be nurturing them, but there's stuff going on that you don't know about. So sometimes it's not a lack of nurturing. It might be a you know, I think we assume all relationships are toxic, and so actually that's an assumption that people come with, and it's actually annoyed me
Mm.
somewhat, that oh yeah, you're better off. But actually sometimes you can get to kind of people who are good at pleasing, people pleasing, and so it it's not it kind of doesn't end so well, but actually it doesn't necessarily always mean that one person's a narcissist or they're both narcissists, and yeah, so that kind of winds me up a bit.
Yeah, and I'm hearing that because you don't realize it's like that pot plant that you keep watering and tending, but you can't figure out what's going on. It's not until you take the plant out the pot, and you realize
There
that
that it's realized it's root bound.
yes.
Yeah.
And I
So
think with some
sometimes
people,
people aren't
it's not
talking about
obvious, is
what's
it?
going on. And so sometimes when relationships end, someone's like shocked that actually, yeah, and that lack of chance to repair,
Mm.
or yeah, because somebody's already made the decision without you.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
That's really sad, isn't it? I think
yeah,
that because one person has made the decision, I see that. Well, that happened to me, but I've also seen it with clients where, well, what happened here? You've decided you want out, that you're not happy, but this is news to me, and then
yeah.
it's such a shock, and
Yeah,
that's
sometimes there's signs that there's kind of disconnection, but other times it might be it might we might put it down to other things and it's actually something else. So yeah, sometimes it's hard to know what's going on if both people aren't able to communicate, as fully as they need to. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I made a list before we came on because I was thinking of some of my clients and some of the hidden losses or not so obvious losses that they haven't kind of either, you know, sometimes they're really obvious because we've got lenses, haven't we, when we're looking for kind of the big stuff, the smallest, you know. Well, it's not even smallest. I hate the concept of big T and little T traumas that people kind of
Mm.
came up with, you know. So if it's obvious, like kind of abuse, like I wasn't fed, I was locked in a cupboard, you know, I throw that out because and quite matter of factly, but that wouldn't be, you know, that would be awful. But it's often the little disconnections, the relational trauma that actually that we don't recognize so much. Um,
No, and the other thing I notice is that people don't actually acknowledge that those little traumas, they're not isolated. They all build and build and build,
it's
making you
consistently unsafe, isn't it?
yeah,
It's
yeah.
consistently unsafe. I'm consistently either scared or unsafe or unpredictableness throughout a period of time that wires a nervous system up to be like
Mm,
walking on eggshells or walking on thin ice.
mm,
Yeah. Yeah. So and emotional neglect is probably one of the hardest to kind of pin down. It's only in the words and the kind of pain in the stories of our clients that sometimes we realize that your adult wasn't able to be emotionally available for you. Yeah.
mm.
Which kind of brings me into I guess one of the hidden us is like that isn't intentionally like I know in one of the early episodes you shared about your illness and that your you know the disruption in your attachments, but and so that was a physical not being there as well as an emotional not being there. But if you've got a depressed parent, then you know there's a hidden loss here in that actually um you're there but not there. Yeah. Yeah. So you're emotionally
Definitely.
unavailable. So there's a loss here that I haven't recognized, but you wouldn't because it's just normal. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then yeah, there is the loss and the loss of not having the parent that you really deserve. Not
Yeah. The
and that
missing the parent you want, not the one you've got.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was also thinking about the secrets families hold. Like I hear families where they don't know that there maybe a mom has lost a child and actually then there's grit they've lost their mom through grit or dad or you know through grief. I know in my late relationship or my kind of last relationship that my that there was a lot of loss in you know a second marriage, first wife dying, and therefore this family was born this kind of the family was born that you know one child was born in the original family and then another marriage happened and then so there's children here who've lost their original mom and then another baby is born and so sometimes families evolve with losses of either a parent um, or a loss through death like miscarriage or stillbirths that are often hidden.
Yeah, and I think I've shared before, but my I had a sister. She was born when I was 2 years old,
Yeah,
but she was stillborn. She died. Well, she wasn't stillborn. She died immediately. She was born. She died at birth.
yeah,
But that was a hidden secret,
yeah.
and for a long time, many for decades. I mean, my parents didn't talk about it openly till I was pregnant with my first child.
Wow.
It was never
A
talked about.
long time to keep a secret, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and none of that grief was talked about. I must have felt it, even at 2, that, what happened there, that loss,
Yeah.
and my parents would have overcompensated then, or maybe not. Maybe
Mm.
I don't think my mother could attach to me. We talked about that before because of what.
Yeah, if you've yeah, we've talked about actually if you have lost a child, then and there's grief there, then actually being able to love other children that come in because that anxiety about you know losing them
Yeah.
may interrupt that attachment. I've also seen it with I call them prized babies. So if a couple of have struggled to have a baby and then either the baby they've had fertility treatments and so they've had to work really hard and invest a lot in you know kind of creating a baby. I don't even know what the right word is. Having a baby, whether it's through infertility, IVF, different forms of
Yeah.
IVF. And so actually, because this baby has been so hard won, I'm more anxious about something happening to it. Yeah. Or traumatic birth. I had a client who told me about, the fact that he nearly lost his wife and two children because he was twins at the right at the beginning. Yeah.
Gosh.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's so much around that whole birth situation.
Traumas. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that acknowledge them. Not really.
No, I had
That's,
another client whose baby was kind of flown to another hospital because it was very sick. And it wasn't until, she was sat with me that she actually started to cry the tears that, oh my God, I nearly lost him. Yeah. Yeah. So
yeah.
how much we pack some of that stuff down because it's just too painful.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah, can't put
Yeah.
with it. So they really are. I mean, they're really, as you say, very painful losses.
Yeah.
I don't always feel able to deal with, but we
Some of
just,
some of the painful ones are also shameful. I was just thinking about how many families may have suicide in their families, and actually the means of death has been either as you can't maybe cover up how someone that somebody has died, but how they have died may be covered up.
yes, that's really interesting because I interviewed a lady from Canada, and she ha- she and her family lied about her
Mm.
husband taking his own life. And they, for 10 years, they told her sons, because she was a widow at that time,
Yeah,
everybody in the community, they agreed that they would say that he died from a car accident. And she was living with that lie,
yeah.
and then she could never get the support, not the real support that she needed, because it's a different, it's still a death and a sad death, but suicide has a different meaning than a car accident.
Yeah, I've got a beautiful book on my bookshelf called Silent Grief that talks about all about the, bereavement through suicide, and it's got some painful but gorgeous survivor stories, and yeah, the shame of how your loved one has chosen to end their life. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah,
So that, I think that's another one. And you're left then, when you have a loss through suicide,
yeah,
there leaves so many unanswered questions.
yeah,
And there is the guilt and the shame and the anger and the distress that goes with it. I think,
yeah,
yeah, a
yeah,
big one. And yet, one of the things what I really balk at hearing is the word of someone committing suicide, because
mm-hmm.
they haven't committed a crime.
No,
They haven't chosen to die. They just want release from pain.
yeah.
And label it as committing suicide, that makes it, to me, it feels like, well, they've committed a crime.
Yeah,
People
I hear
commit.
you. My terminology is that they've chosen to end their life. Or yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So
That's really
all of
important. I
that
think language is so, yeah, I gob off about it quite a lot, and I'm quite pedantic. Yeah, I
yeah, me
remember telling you I
too.
was accurate, and you were like, no shit. Yeah, I'm
I'm the
kind of,
same. If I hear those words, committed suicide,
yeah,
can I ask you to stop there and consider that,
yeah,
and what's been said? And no, please don't do that, because
yeah,
when anyone hearing it, it's such a harsh word. So,
yeah, yeah. I've got one that I haven't put on the list,
oh,
as we
go
were
ahead.
having a look, and I don't know why, because it's one I work with quite a lot. And I'm thinking adoption and fostering. I don't know what it's the one most obvious because it's such a big area of work. I've worked with foster agencies, and I do quite a bit of work with social services, and so the one of the biggest hidden losses is adoption of people who haven't been told they're adopted, and
Yes.
they're feeling that loss. I shared this still face experiment video,
Yeah.
which anyone can go and have a look at, that shows you how babies feel pain of disconnection. But people have this notion that when a child is adopted, that it's too young to know. And it's just like, there's so many books written on adoption. Nancy Verrier writes about the primal wound, and I've got quite a lot of them on my shelf. And it fascinates me because there is grief here for the child that's been adopted. There's grief. There's a triad of grief. There's the grief from the child that's been adopted. There is the grief for the foster parents who may not have been able to have their own children, and the grief of the child they get, and the child they wanted, and the child they get. And so there's so many layers to this. And then there's the grief of the kind of the birth parents. Yeah. So and actually when you're adopted, you get a loss of history. You don't have any history.
Mm.
Yeah.
Where do I
Yeah.
fit? Who am I? They've got
Yeah.
no medical history, have they? They've got no.
Actually, I'm the same. I'm just thinking I'm not adopted, but I'm the same. I don't have a medical history because I was actually, we haven't talked about, yeah, they're just coming at me left, right, and center. Refugees. I'm a runaway. I chose to leave. Well, I left for a better life at 16. And so actually, whilst I chose to leave, it was a choice of survival, so a hard
Yeah,
choice.
yeah,
But yeah, that loss of history, identity that comes from not knowing when you ask questions about any any heart problems in your family, and you kind of like, I don't know.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there are so many. Oh, wow, where do we move from there?
Yeah, I'm
Because
thinking with the loss of kind of identity and history comes all the losses of being able to join in as well. I remember at one of the office jobs I had many years ago, somebody had the bright idea that why don't we all bring our baby photographs in? And we can play guess the baby. And there's this assumption of normal childhoods, yeah. And I say normal in the kind of like, I had parents and I've got a history that is kind of intact in some way. And actually, I remember thinking, I don't know what to do. Froze in panic. It was like, I don't want to tell them what's happened to me. I wasn't in that place where I wasn't ashamed of it. And I don't want to disclose this much about myself, but I don't have a baby picture. And I was like, then do I just find a baby picture and like pretend it's me? Do I fake
mm,
it? And actually what I chose to do was phone in sick.
yes, I've
To
heard that
avoid
from a client as
it.
well. That what do you do? Yeah, you just can't because it's too much. It's overwhelming, and then having to feel you've got to explain to others
Yeah,
why, and that's
yeah,
too much because well, you're not in a place to want to talk about it. You're not in a place to kind of, well, what happened? Why haven't you got any pictures? And then,
yeah,
well, I don't want to talk about it. Why don't you want to talk about it? Because often people won't leave it alone.
yeah.
They won't be
Why haven't you
respectful
got any
enough.
family? Yeah, people keep asking
Yeah,
me, why haven't you got any family? And I'm like, I'm not sure I want to explain.
no,
It's a
saying I
big
don't want. Yeah,
story. Yeah,
absolutely. And
yeah,
then the other alternative is that I've got to explain, I've got to say I don't want to talk about it. And then you're seen as being difficult or aloof or not, yeah, that or you get labeled with all kinds of things. And I think
yeah,
talked about and yeah, whatever way you go, it can feel really uncomfortable.
yeah.
So there's all of that. And then what about moving off of that? Because I think that's really sad when we talk about those losses. But what about loss of job? I mean, we talk with that can be quite, oh well, what's your problem? But that can be our identifier, you know, a human
I've been through it
person.
3 times in redundancy, and
Yeah.
one when I became so unwell, around not far off this time last year, where I wasn't able to work, and it was catastrophic for me because I
Oh,
had to close my practice overnight,
yeah.
abandon clients because I just wasn't physically able to be there. And so
No.
loss of a relationship, loss of job, financial security.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I think when you lose a job very suddenly, whether it's through ill health or redundancy,
Or
I
even being
think,
fired.
or being fired. Yeah, I've been fired too.
Me too.
And I've also quit. My shortest job was 4 hours. Um, um, it's emergency. It's almost emotional. Some of this stuff is emotional whip. I call it emotional whiplash. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're stopped so suddenly that you just don't know what to do. Yeah,
Yeah,
your
because
whole
yeah,
routine disappears. You can be isolated.
yeah.
Yeah.
But it's
Um,
what's wrong with me, and it really makes us feel shamed. It
the
makes us
shame of being let go and no
feel
endings. I think for a lot of this stuff, I'm just kind of as I'm thinking of my own experiences of kind of redundancy, being kind of escorted off the premises in case you kind of commit corporate sabotage,
yes,
um, being treated like, that you're no longer part of this kind of team, and not having, when you leave because you've resigned, and you may be working your notice period and you're going to another, it's maybe a
yeah,
neater transition and you're going to a job.
yeah.
Then you have the rituals of, I think we should, I almost want to do, can we add another one on for rituals and routines, because
Why
I think
not?
that's so
Yeah,
important.
I think
We
so.
could, this series could just go on and on and on, couldn't it?
It could.
Yeah, so you don't have those rituals and routines of endings. It's like miscarriage. There's no there's no funeral. Yeah, there's no funeral. And so that some of the routines and rituals with hidden losses aren't there. There's no endings. There's no saying goodbyes. Yeah, thankfully, one of my friends was outraged, and they kind of like organized the leaving party for me. And I remember being so upset that I was spent a good hour in the loo crying because I was leaving them all, and I wouldn't come out the loo. And yeah, I eventually did come out the loo and cried outside with the friends that I wasn't going to be working with
Mm,
anymore. But I think loss of identity as well, when you
yeah.
don't, if your identity is fixed in one thing.
Mm.
Yeah. I'm thinking of parents, that your lack of identity as like Stacy, Ian, Peter, Paul, as you become mum or dad. Those are
Oh,
really,
yeah.
really, unnoticed kind of losses.
Absolutely.
I say unnoticed because it can be like years on that I realize actually I'm just I'm a one, no, there's no thing as just a parent. I think it's the fucking hardest job in the world, and in any other profession it would be illegal. No days off, no pay.
Yeah.
um so sometimes that loss, and actually I'm updating, my brain's updating as we're going, because my battery's dying. Hold on, I'm not plugged in.
Okay. So while you're plugging yourself in, replugging
Yeah,
again,
it wasn't
can I just
connecting.
add, um, not just loss of identity as a mother, but also as a partner, a wife. I mean, I can remember as much as I loved being a wife and mother, it was I felt I did lose my identity because it was a case of I was invited to events because I was somebody's husband. Well, it was my husband's event.
Yeah,
I was invited to events because the kids were invited and I
yeah,
was their mother. And all of a sudden, I'm somebody's wife and somebody's mother. And as much as they were brilliant roles, but where was me in this? And I hear this a lot with clients, lots of mums going, I haven't got an income. I've got no independence. I'm just accepted as part of a unit of some kind.
I hear you.
That
I'm
hit.
holding back grief now, a really, really strong grief, because actually through my breakup, I was no longer a wife. I was no longer a therapist. And then I was no longer a fur baby mom.
Yeah.
Yeah. I lost all of them in one. I was like, I've I've lost all of that purpose. So sometimes, yeah, all in one go, and that grief just came up as, yeah, um, yeah, I'm a therapist again. I was never not a therapist. It was just a really hard time of like, I don't think I can do this job anymore. Everything's just too painful and I'm useless. But actually, um and somebody's told me that I wasn't ready to hear it, but they told me I'd be a better therapist as a result. But I was just struggling to cope at the time, and still do occasionally. And so actually, I didn't want to hear it at the time, but actually, and I think I've said to you, I thought I knew grief, I thought I knew trauma, yeah. And actually, I kind of, that critical voice was, I knew fucking nothing. And then I've updated it to actually a much kinder version that actually it's a massively new kind of knowing, yeah.
Yeah.
And so yeah, loss sometimes does create kind of shoots of growth, but not in that moment, because it's too, it's just too much, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I was thinking of
absolutely.
another one as well, in freedom, of choices in different kind of scenarios. So I'm thinking, when women have babies, they suddenly lose their loss of freedom to kind of just go out without their
Oh,
baby, and so that we may get postnatal depression of this sudden change. Yeah, no sleep.
yeah,
I got this,
yeah.
that overwhelming. I've got this human to look after. Yeah,
And a very demanding one that you cannot ignore. You cannot ignore
exactly.
that little bundle of joy at all, because it's going to really make it clear that it needs our attention as a mother. But
Yeah,
you've got to put it
yeah,
first.
he or she kind of, yeah, feed
That's
me,
it. It doesn't matter.
change
I don't
me.
care
Yeah,
whether the baby, no kind of consideration for mum or dad or parent of whatever, because it doesn't matter if you don't have enough sleep. That baby has to be fed, looked after, cuddled, changed,
yeah,
cared for in every way. And so the whole being, you just, that's it. That is that little being will just demand our attention. And I
yeah,
remember my appearing on my daughter's doorstep when she'd not long had her first baby, and she stood there, and she's in her PJs, and she said, "Mum, it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I haven't even brushed my teeth yet." And it was that real kind of, but I can't. Where am I in all of this? So
yeah,
yeah, it just can be very overwhelming, that loss of choices in that
yeah.
situation.
Whilst I haven't had a child, I had one of my very first dog who became my therapy dog, Max. He had a brain tumor, and so we and was left with epilepsy, and then eventually the tumor got bigger and he lost his sight, and on losing his sight he became very anxious and he would not sleep during the night, and so my partner and I we and taking care of Max, we only slept like oh, I feel the grief of him. There's a lot of grief around at the moment. They're all linked, aren't they? Like in this little invisible closed line. Yeah. Um, yeah. Well, in towards the end of his life, he wouldn't sleep, so we kind of functioned both on 3 hours sleep each to get him through the night. And so yeah, I had a newfound empathy for that chronic loss of sleep and loss of sanity almost, and wanting to burst into tears on people or rip their heads off. And the only conversation that we had was, has Max? Yeah, has Max? How's he doing? And so, yeah, that kind of loss of self through kind of illness, or so, and actually that brings me to sibling losses, the loss of attachment, because my kid sister is sick. Yeah, I've lost my mom because actually my sister's in hospital all the time, and so I'm over here. Nobody, my attachment needs may not be met because somebody else's needs are greater. So if you have a disabled or a sick sibling, yeah,
Yeah,
if you have a
yeah.
disabled child, there's a loss of freedoms too. Yeah.
And even the other way around, if you have a parent who has some kind of
Oh my God, the
disability.
other end of the spectrum, yeah, when my in-laws were dying, towards, and my father-in-law died of cancer. Yeah, and we just don't have those honest conversations. We had days where it was like, will he just please die?
Mm,
Yeah,
yeah,
because he was
yeah.
so hard and so exhausting, for
Mm,
my partner at the time, and his sibling to kind of care for somebody who is at the end of life.
Yeah,
Yeah. And so, yeah, we don't have these honest conversations that I love you, but I can't, it's hard to watch that loss of
yeah,
control of not being able to kind of make those choices to stop someone suffering. We get a
yeah.
choice with pets, but not with humans.
I know,
Yeah.
and that's a whole different conversation because
Oh God, yeah, massive one. Yeah.
um, so yeah, but also that small child that needs the parent, but the parent can't provide at all of those needs due to disability of some kind, whether
Yeah.
it's a physical or um,
Oh, you reminded me of a lovely family I worked with. Mum had very little sight, so her little boy had to um do a lot of caring for her, and so a loss of childhood from being an adult too soon.
absolutely. Or the parent, yeah, the parent can't care for the child, take care of their needs for whatever reason, and
Yeah.
it can be because we don't talk about those disabilities, but sometimes maybe there's addictions involved, or those kinds of, or the fact that the parent is one of the parents is so dependent on their partner that they ignore the child or the child's needs aren't considered. For
Hmm.
example, if you've got an abusive relationship, I'm
Yeah.
thinking about that, where the mother, for it, I'm going to say the mother, but she is so tied up with the needs of her partner that the child doesn't get considered as much as they
That
should.
was me. That was me. Yeah, that was that you just described some of my history. My
Wow.
mother was so insecure, no friends, um, that kind of real insecure attachment, where she couldn't even tolerate his family. I didn't see my grandmother because my mother couldn't tolerate anyone. Yeah, so that isolating off because yeah, so yeah, I often said, yeah, if you're in that kind of relationship, someone is almost buried alive, by the other weight of the other person in that relationship. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Oh,
So
well,
yeah, so many layers, isn't there? And
there
so
are.
and so much of our own stuff is evoked as we're talking about this stuff. Because yeah, I had there was something else that just sprung to mind but it's gone and it'll probably come back.
Trying to get another one about.
Or your sound's gone a little muffly.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Okay. But I would like to bring in one that people don't talk about very much and at all, really, loss of virginity,
yeah,
because sometimes there's a choice around it, and it can be quite a pleasant experience.
yeah.
But what about that girl who is raped? What
Mm,
about that girl who's forced into it? What about if it's I want to be liked, and the only way I feel I can be liked is by sleeping with somebody when I'm not ready?
yeah,
About that shame around it? What about, you know, what about when virginity means something more? I mean, there are cultures where the girl is judged as to whether her hymen's been broken,
yeah,
and if you're not a virgin when then you are unclean. There are so many layers around that,
yeah.
and I think it is not just choices, but it's losses.
I think the biggest one that overrides all of this, as you talk about, kind of rape, is the loss of safety, physically or emotional. That kind of that, it's really we'll drill it down to this that plays out in our relationships. It's not about just what's happening in the now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I remember working with a couple and she was moaning about his drinking. Yeah. And as I explored, I was thinking, I'm not sure this guy, fits the description of an alcoholic or someone with a drink problem. He has his breaks, he stops, his not drinking excessively. Well, the definitions of an addiction is something that you can't stop, that is harmful to you and harmful to your relationship. And actually, he could stop. Yeah. I don't think it was harmful to him. He was having like a beer, a two, a couple of times a week. But it was harmful to his relationship, and he didn't really know why. Yeah. And actually, as we started to explore, why is this important to you? Yeah. And he's like, I'm not giving up, I'm not giving up my occasional beer. Yeah. And she was like, actually, she wanted to create this loss for him of, you're not gonna drink. Yeah. And actually what it was rooted in was like, why is this important to you? Yeah. What's your relationship with alcohol?
Yeah.
And it turned out that actually she'd lost her safety with a parent that drank and was often quite a volatile drunk. Yeah. And so that loss of consistency is a huge one, isn't it? And
Yeah.
so consistency, safety. And so, yeah, when he was drinking, she couldn't trust that. She was so anxious that this would spiral into something
Yeah.
else, even though he had never spiraled into more than a few drinks. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Loss of trust.
Yes, loss of trust. And when we're talking about that, and I went from the rape, I'm going on to the childhood sexual abuse,
Yeah.
because that is so big in
Mm-hmm.
adult relationships.
Yeah.
There is that um, the violation of the child, the secrecy that has to be kept,
Yeah.
because they're threatened, or they're cajoled, or they're promised things. I mean, that grooming is promised.
Yeah. Or they
Um,
disclose and are not believed.
yeah, that goes on to
Yeah.
not be believed.
Yeah.
But then how that affects later relationships, because
Yeah.
that has a huge effect, the trust. But there is that loss of childhood there again, and
Yeah.
the loss of belief that I can trust, whether it was a parent, whether it
Yeah.
was a relative, which it so often can be.
Yeah.
I can remember one of my clients told me, when I was a volunteer counsellor for rape and sexual abuse for several years. And one of my clients said she phoned her, she phoned her mum when she was with her dad, because they'd split up, and she was 6 years old. Can you please tell Daddy I don't want to have sex with him anymore? And those stories are just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then how she was going to lose her father, which she did. There is a chance, if I own up to this, I'm going to lose a parent, because they're going to gang up against me. They're not
It's
going to
just a
believe it.
grenade that goes off in a
It's
family when
absolute, but
it's
there's
it,
so
it's
much
yeah.
loss around there.
Yeah.
Let alone loss of freedom, which you talked about,
Yeah.
choice, loss of future relationships sometimes.
Yeah.
There's so much involved in it. I
I
think
think there's so much around privileges that we don't know we have that until they're gone.
yeah,
Safety is a massive one, yeah. And can we talk about not just the safety from childhood abuse, but the safety that comes from around loss? Because as a child or an adult experiences the death, it doesn't just mean the painful loss of your loved one. It's actually the loss of safety, because actually it changes my sense of the world, that things are no longer permanent. It creates anxiety. For children, we often see separation anxiety, behaviors that can be regressive behaviors that happen. So yeah, there was another one that just flew into my head and has just disappeared. So the loss of safety can happen at any time. Like somebody who's burgled. Yeah, we don't talk
yeah,
about those kind of the not everyday traumas, but the loss of safety if you've had your home violated. I had intruders in my home when I was 19. Yeah. And so actually, I heard them breathing on the other side of a door. And so that kind of loss of safety because somebody's been in your, and you're and not feeling safe because someone's been in your home. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
So yeah, it's yeah, there's so many, isn't there? It's, as we're
There are,
talking,
but
it's, I'm just
yeah.
kind of like they're flying in fast and furious, and
As you say, they
yeah,
just don't get recognised. We don't identify them. We
no,
just it's brushed aside.
yeah,
Um, it's so much, oh, just what's your problem? Just jog on, move on.
yeah,
People aren't allowed to that. They're not allowed to grieve their losses because
no,
it's not acceptable in society, or other people can't cope with that. They don't want to
yeah,
hear it. Just, yeah, I don't want to hear your problem.
yeah.
Mm,
I remember working with a client quite a long time ago, and we were exploring why um her relationship patterns, kind of dating, and who she'd kind of dated, and why they'd ended, and who she picked in the first place. And
mm,
actually it never dawned on her until we got talking, and then sometimes I kind of work it out, because we kind of, there's a knowing, isn't there? Reading between the lines as therapists, we're looking for as much of what isn't said than what is brought into the room. And I just said to this client, there's some massive I think there's some massive disruptions in your attachments, where you moved around a lot. And it's a horrible term, but it is used. She was, I and I said to her, are you a forces child? I was gentle, and she was like, yeah, I'm an army brat. Yeah.
yeah.
And she was moved literally every couple of years. They were moved and stationed elsewhere. So what she learnt was, actually there's no point making friends
Mm,
because I've had to keep losing them.
yeah.
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 And so actually, and even in relationships, it was hard to settle down. Yeah.
Mm,
I'm thinking of the threat of loss rather than an actual loss, where I also remember a lovely guy, kind of so insecure in relationships. He was really, really struggling. Yeah. Everything panicked him. He just could not feel safe in this relationship. And I was explored, what happened to you? What happened? Yeah, not what's wrong with you, but what happened
mm.
that has left you chronically, like, someone's gonna leave me. Yeah. And
Yeah, and I hear that. I don't know whether you hear it with couples, but one or the other will threaten to leave. I've
this
had
is what
enough
I was
of.
getting at.
Right,
This
sorry,
child, yeah, it's
yeah.
okay. This child had yeah, this adult had got, his inner child was here with us, and he was remembering quite almost a somatic, memory of, kind of going into that panic as he remembered. It was that, it was kind of that etched in his body that
Mm,
that actually there was this pattern of him sitting on the stairs, watching a parent who'd threatened to leave, pack a bag and go, and keep coming back, going and coming back, going and coming back. So it wasn't just a loss like a divorce or a separation, which is painful and hard enough as it is, but actually a repeating.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And I think that really kind of smoothly segues into those that often they are children from the forces that are sent to boarding schools,
yeah. I've
which is
worked with
one you brought up
clients who
earlier.
have been, yeah, kind of, I want to say dropped off, but if I'm honest, I feel abandoned at boarding school. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
and those that are allowed home or not allowed home, and not having the attachment figure whilst they're in boarding school,
yeah,
and
yeah,
that, yeah, that real abandonment, and you hear the adults say, "Oh, well, it didn't do me any harm, and it was the best school," and etc. But they're not recognizing or really realizing the effect it would have on
yeah.
them
I
emotionally.
had someone who was, gripped in a very big addictions, but was still kind of adamant that it was nothing to do with this really painful traumatic history. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, yeah, yeah. What happens to us matters so very much, doesn't it?
Yes, and I think, as you say, they're hidden losses. They have the loss of, if you're sent to boarding school, the loss of that love of that parent, the loss of that attachment figure, the loss of the freedom, the loss of your friends at home. Because if you come home, then you haven't got the friends that you had around you that were local. Uh,
Yeah,
or even if you move schools for whatever reason, as you said, you can't make those attachments.
yeah,
It's transient the whole time. And I wasn't an army brat, but we moved house several times when I was a child. And
yeah,
so I couldn't make those connections. I couldn't make those friendships. I always felt on the outside
yeah,
because I was always felt I'm intruding, I'm on the edge. And
yeah.
I mean, it wasn't totally down to that, but it was a big part
I,
of
I've heard I've heard some more positive stories of boarding where the home life is so chaotic that school
yeah.
offered stability, but it's very often the other way around. I'm also thinking of estrangement, the loss of through divorce, the loss of access to children, grandparents. I call them the living losses. Yeah,
Yes, definitely. There really are living losses. If you can't see that parent, or you're denied that for whatever reason as a child, or yes, you're gonna, or you can't see that those paternal, maternal grandparents,
yeah.
or the relatives, and there's huge loss around that.
My neighbours just come into my head too. My neighbour lived next door to me for 24 years. And one day my dog went in to go, her door was always open, so we just used to wander in and out. We were quite close. And then one day I went in and she was like, "Who are you?" Oh gosh, that's really, yeah, who are you? Yeah, she's been dead a good few years now, but yeah, that loss of your kind of elderly parent, relative, close connection, big through dementia.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's a very cruel illness.
yeah,
I think that's incredibly cruel for everyone involved, because there is a who are you?
yeah,
Um, really, really sad.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, living, yes, losses. Such a big subject, and it there's so many effects in our lives, so many areas of our lives that we don't recognize, and they're not always acknowledged, as you said.
no. And I'm realizing how the different yeah, I'm noticing the different me that's here because of how much grief I am holding. There's
Yeah,
yeah,
I
yeah,
noticed that. Yeah, there was a change in your mood at that point. You went quite, yes, your
yeah,
energy.
as I'm remembering my own losses and ones that are still very, very raw. Yeah. Yeah, this is diff there's no more excited man, isn't there? My brain's still going, but yeah, there's yeah. I guess it's the subject we're talking about. Yeah, we're
Yes,
as we're talking, we're remembering, we're experiencing what is old and what is new.
yeah.
Yeah. I'm thinking I'm gonna go there. There's just a loss of sanity.
Oh,
You know, the inability to control your own nervous system with chronic mental health, the loss of trust from other people, your reliability as you become chaotic. Yeah, and reputation, even. Yeah, yeah,
yeah. Yes, that's true, because it mental health or I think any kind of loss in how people can distance themselves because they can't cope, they find it too much. Um, so I think,
yeah. I think for me, I lost friends because they didn't know how to be emotionally available, and I think they were overwhelmed, and so they
mm,
yeah, I in my attempts to survive, it was too painful for them, and so they pulled back. And
mm,
then other people, I withdrew from because they couldn't emotionally support me, and I was in danger of annihilating them in the pain and anger that I was going to project. So some of it was about protecting other people. And then some of it was about loss of trust, that actually it's really frightening when you don't trust anyone. So actually that kind of pulling away, because it's too painful now to, sometimes we bring around the abandonment that we're dreading in
Yeah.
relationships. And so there's kind of layers of loss, because we can't tolerate trust,
Yeah.
yo-yoing in and out. Yeah, yeah,
I'm gonna bring in. I'm gonna. I'm gonna bring in. I'm gonna use an overriding title here, but
Hmm.
amputation.
Say that again.
Amputation.
Oh my
Loss of a
gosh,
body.
yes, yeah,
And I think the I'm going to bring in a personal story again, if I may, because
yeah,
I decades ago now, I had breast cancer, which meant I had a mastectomy, which meant I lost a breast.
yeah,
That meant so much to me, and I can remember thinking, I've had the conversation with a therapist who works with cancer patients
yeah,
now, but it felt bad for me to say, but I still own this. I didn't know which was more distressing at the time, the loss of a breast or a loss of the possibility of losing my life.
yeah.
And people may go, what? But that was real for me, and I'm going to own it, because
No, I think you're
that
allowed to own
feeling,
it. It's a part of your body
mm,
has gone.
well, it
Loss of
defined
your
my
femininity,
femininity.
maybe
That
even,
was it.
yeah, identity is of your femininity, your,
Mm,
dare I say it, your sexiness as
yes,
well,
exactly. It
yeah,
was
this
all tied
trauma's
up in
happened
it.
to your body. It doesn't look the same. I've had I didn't think, I thought I knew who I was, and I did. I knew who that person was, but actually this traumatic person, um, I've lost weight. So yeah, that how our bodies change through trauma, whether it's through amputation, whether
Yeah.
it's through stress of overeating, undereating, yeah, loss of
And it was
ability to eat, sleep.
yes. And then those people that have had an amputation of a leg or a limb of
My
some
good
kind.
friend John, I'm going to call him my good friend John, who did my video. Yeah, has is an amputee, and I think having listened to a lot of his story, which I'm not going to share. He shares publicly, so and identifies as an amputee, and I think he's a gorgeous human being. Hope he
Yeah.
might watch this. Um, John, I think you're gorgeous if you're out there listening. Um, but it's a bereavement. It's a
Yeah.
bereavement of shutting down. The stages of grief are there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Loss of hope of what my life looks like. With the loss of an arm, a leg. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that is one that
I
doesn't get recognized all the
I think
time.
with cancer also, I had surgery for cancer many, many years ago, and then had a scare just a year or two ago. And I remember thinking, I've supported a couple of clients that it's not my specialism. They developed cancer while while I was working with them, and I stayed with them until sadly they died,
Mm.
and so through end of life. But actually, even when you are in remission from cancer, and talking to somebody very recently, it may have left your front door, but it's often still lurking at the bottom of the road. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's yeah,
that's a very good way of putting it. I think
yeah,
you're right. I think for many, many years it was there. It was at my front door for quite a while, and then it just kind of, I think it receded to the back door. Now
yeah,
it kind of went down the road, and I think it's in a different town. But
yeah.
it just, or maybe even the country. I don't even think about it anymore. It's not
It's
remission.
just, yeah,
And
how
also,
many things affect our kind of emotional and physical safety. I'm thinking car accidents. I had a massive car accident, and I had to learn to walk again. And so
gosh,
the loss of your,
yeah,
and I've also been in a wheelchair with a very damaged ankle. In fact, a couple of times I'm dyspraxic, so I've had lots of injuries.
yeah,
And actually, that loss of of mobility,
yes.
yeah.
Yeah, because I fractured an ankle many years ago, and it again, it is that loss of freedom. You're dependent on others. You can't do what you want to do. All right, that was temporary for me, but it's still a loss. That loss of of freedom, of choice, of being able to
Yeah, I
do.
always remember going on
Mm.
a girls' weekend to New York, and two of my friends, we were all runners, and the two of them went running in Central Park, and I couldn't go because I had um really chronic back pain, and I remember just crying because I couldn't go with them. I couldn't join in, and that grief sometimes of not being able to yeah, another different type of joining in from the
Mm.
baby photos. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. Anything else? I think there's a lot in here, but I
There's
think if you
lots of
have
layers.
more
Yeah.
about how do you deal with those losses before we
We
end.
haven't really talked about like I guess the process of loss, have
No,
we?
we
There's
haven't.
maybe
Haven't.
maybe we've I think we've kind of crept through the different types of losses, but I really think I don't know whether we should do a session on um almost coping with loss, what that looks like, surviving it. It might be quite difficult for me because I'm still in the process of that, and it's messy. But actually, yeah, the stages of grief, the myths around grief, how we're missed and not supported with
Yes.
loss, and almost expected to get on with it on your own. And also, yeah, and I had a really hurtful message, and I've actually chosen to kind of just stay away a little bit because it was so hurtful, from somebody who just said, oh, I thought this would be easier by now.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I think there is, and I think yes, I think in the future, maybe not right away,
No,
because you say you're still feeling very
that's,
sad,
yeah, yeah.
but I think there is. I just like to say, people say, but you should get over it. There is no getting over it,
No, we live
and I
with
think I
grief. It
just want
lives
to
with
end that,
us.
and
Yeah,
it is always there to some degree or another. And I
absolutely.
want to
Yeah,
reassure people of that because I
yeah.
think they feel guilty. Why am I still feeling this way? As though it's measured in time or space, and you can't.
No,
We're all individuals, and I think I'd like to leave our listeners with that one.
yeah, yeah. Where are we for time? Are we?
Yeah, and I think we have almost come to the end now.
Oh,
So I
wait.
think,
It's probably just as well because something's going on with my laptop and but I
oh
don't seem to be
no.
charged. I don't seem to be. Oh, I've got a really, yeah, it's charging, but I've got a loose connect. Yeah, it's charging now. I've got one of those wobbly. Oh, yeah, I've got a wobbly connection. It's kind of like it's a very good metaphor for my life right now. My
Yes,
laptop
I
is
think
echoing
so.
my world. Wobbly connections.
So shall we say goodbye now for now? Is
Yeah,
that
let's
good
say
enough?
goodbye for there. Thank
All
you,
right.
Wendy,
Thank
again for exploring with me, and for our listeners, if we have any. This is new.
thank you for your insights as well.
Yeah,
It's been
maybe
been
persuade a
brilliant.
friend to watch it, see what they think. We might
All
have,
right.
yeah, yeah. My chronicky doughty mouse just come back. It'll be fine.
Yeah, bye. That
Well,
reappears quite
yeah.
often. All
Let's
right
shall we
then.
say
So take
goodbye for
care.
now, everyone.
Bye
Bye,
now.
Wendy.